and broadcast. All right. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's live online author event with Greenlight Bookstore. I'm Jessica from Greenlight, and we are so honored tonight to partner with Bomb Magazine and co-hosting this event with Marie-Helene Bertino, presenting her new book, Parakeet. She's going to be talking with Alexandra Kleeman, and Angel Nafis is going to open the event up with the poetry reading, so we are all just really lucky to be here. And before we start, I just want to say a huge thanks to everyone for being here, for making this happen. It's a strange and terrifying time in the world, but we're really grateful to be able to make this space for something beautiful and wonderful, and that's what you're going to get tonight. These are beautiful and wonderful people, and we're all really lucky to be in the same virtual room with them. So a couple of housekeeping things before we get started. You can see and hear the speakers if you're joining now. They can't see and hear you, but they can see your name, so they know you're here. If you have any comments you want to share, if you want to say, hi, I'm here, I love you, you can use the chat for that. That'll be open the whole time in the event. We're also going to use that to paste some links to buy the book and some other great information, including organizations that we're going to talk about tonight. If you have a question specifically that you would like for Marie to answer, you can use the Q&A. So that's a separate little icon over there. If you click on that, you can put your question in there, and Alex is going to be moderating that Q&A. We'll take some questions later on in the evening. We are recording tonight's event, so look for audio or video versions on our website and social media channels later on, including on YouTube, hopefully first thing tomorrow. And importantly, tonight's featured book, Parakeet, is available for sale from greenlightbookstore.com. Our bookstore locations are closed, but we are working with our supplier warehouse for pretty fast direct-to-home shipping. So if you care about supporting the careers of authors and the ongoing existence of independent bookstores, buying tonight's featured book is a great way to show your support. And we're actually offering a special $5 off coupon on the featured book. When you put in the code Parakeet, when you buy it from greenlightbookstore.com, you can get that $5 off, so as long as you do it sometime this week. So I'm going to introduce tonight's participants in reverse order of appearance. Our interviewer for tonight is Alexandra Kleeman. She's the author of Intimations, a short story collection, and the novel You Too Can Have a Body Like Mine, which was awarded the Bard Fiction Prize. She's an assistant professor at the New School, and her second novel, Something New Under the Sun, is forthcoming from Hogarth Press. She's going to be speaking with our featured author, Marie-Helene Bertino. She's the author previously of 2 AM at the Cat's Pajamas and the story collection Safe as Houses. And she's formerly an editor at One Story and Catapult, and now teaches at NYU and the New School, as well as the Institute of American Indian Arts in Santa Fe. She's our neighbor in Brooklyn, and we're so excited to be here to talk about her beautiful new book tonight. Her reading is going to be introduced by Chantal McStay, who's the associate editor at Bomb Magazine. So thanks in advance for Chantal for kicking things off. But first, before that, we are lucky enough to hear from our own Angel Nafis. So Angel is a Greenlight Bookstore alum, and she's the founder and curator of the Greenlight Bookstore Poetry Salon, along with her many other accomplishments. She's the author of the book Black Girl Mansion, and her work has appeared in the Breakbeat Poets anthology series and many other places. She reads poems and facilitates workshops across the country, and also lives and works here in Brooklyn. So we're going to have Angel start things off for us. Angel, take it away.
Hi, thank you, Jess, and thank you everyone for coming through and just supporting Marie and her beautiful book that I've been waiting for since before I was in the womb. I'm gonna read some poems, and before I do that, if it's okay with everyone, I just wanna take a sec. I mean, I'm feeling grimy of soul and spirit. And I feel just with the immense amount of folks online right now at this event, I feel like I want to gather our thoughts and just for a minute, just take even like 30 seconds to a minute and just breathe through and kind of be present with each other, be present for each other. So I'm just gonna close my eyes. And wherever you are, just close your eyes, take a deep, 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 deep breath, hold it, and then just like push all the air out and just level yourself, like get where you need to be whatever's around you, water, whatever you need. And we'll just be together for this evening and be with each other and be with this beautiful book. And for the brief snatch of time that we can just confiscate some beauty to ourselves, we'll do that. Okay. 1, 2, 3. One, two, three. One, two, three. Okay. Thank you all. Just feel your feet on the ground. Feel your heart in your chest. Feel your guts in your body. You're good. If you're here, you're good. You're doing the right thing. If you're alive, you're doing the best that you can. And I'm here with you, and I'm happy to be here with you. And I'm gonna read some of these damn poems. Okay. Gazelle for becoming your own country, after Rachel Eliza Griffith. Know what the almost gone dandelion knows? Piece by piece, the body prayers home, its whole head a veil, a wind-blown bride. When all the mothers go gone, frame the portraits, wood spoon over boiling pot, test the milk on your own wrist, you soil, sand, and mud-grown bride. If you miss your stop or lose love, if even the medicine hurts too, even when your side eye, your face stink, still your heart moans, bride. Fuck the fog back off the mirror. Trust the road in your name. Ride your moon high through the pitch black, gots to be your own bride. Burn the honey, write the letters. What address could hold you? Nectar arms, nectar hands, old tire sound against the gravel baritone bride. Goodest grief is an orchard, you know, but you have not been killed once. Angel, put that on everything. Self, country, stone, bride. I have a set list vaguely over here, and I'm just deciding between these two. I'm gonna read this one. It's about my boo, and I don't know, I mean, none of you know this. I don't think I've ever told this story before, but I met Marie because she's amazing and wrote an amazing story. And a friend of mine had a galley of her first short story collection, shout out Six Houses. And she gave it to my girlfriend and was like, this person is a freak in the exact way you are. You should read this book. And Shira started reading it. And she was like, oh my God, you have to read this story in it. And I'm a bookseller for like a million years. It's like really hard to recommend a book to a bookseller. Like we're like, please, I know. But we were driving back like 4 hours on a long hour drive, and she was like, just read a couple pages out loud. Bitch, when I say this story fucked, it's so beautiful. Actually, and I don't really fuck with short stories like that. And I was like, maybe I actually now only fuck with short stories, specifically this one. And when we got home, we read the entire story out loud to each other in bed. And it wasn't just, it brought me to Marie. It did, like we wrote her this huge love letter and we were like, you're the best person. Can we know you forever? Like, please be our child. But also I think it brought her and I close together in the way that when you love a thing, it helps you love someone who loves that thing more. You love them more. And I don't think I've ever said that to her, but in some way you're like the setup friend. Anyway, so I'm gonna read this poem about my boo. Open, as told by Celie from The Color Purple. Sturdy and untethered. In some ways, she like a for the world lay hands. And it feel like I shouldn't be nowhere around her. I don't want to be a fox in the field, ruining the grapes. But she said she was wondering what my room looked like. And when she say this, I wanna fall all on her neck, my chest deep as a well, just wondering what she might haul off and say next. I'm so afraid she's gonna stop talking that I talk. I tell her about the sounds Brooklyn makes all through the night, and it feel like my bed in the middle of the road. I tell her about my cramps, how it hurts so much, I think there should be ash where my womanhood be. And us both laugh at that. Then she tell me she cut out dairy altogether, help with her womanhood some. Now what she do that for? I ain't touched, not a dollop of cream in days, and it don't take but one look at her ponytail all calm and laying flat between her shoulders where anybody with sense would want to be laying, and I get to telling jokes. It all I can do to keep the slobber in my mouth. Plus, the light in the room is all orange-like. Make me glad my shoulder out. Then she say, she be right back. But right back be my enemy quick. But I take her at her word. And my mind wanders. And I think of two big red roses linked up against each other in a vase. And how they only job be to drink water and open. I'll read one more, and because I don't give a fuck, because my country has left me nan choice, I'm gonna read some Audre Lorde from The Black Unicorn, which you should buy Marie's book and The Black Unicorn for your like problematic auntie or whatever is happening in your life. Both of those texts. Okay, this is called A Litany for Survival. And I just dedicate this to everybody in just the street right now, literally risking being maimed and abducted by the police. A litany for survival. For those of us who live at the shoreline, standing upon the constant edges of decision, crucial and alone. For those of us who cannot indulge the passing dreams of choice, who love in doorways, coming and going, in the hours between dawns, looking inward and outward at once, before and after, seeking a now that can breed futures like bread in our children's mouths, so their dreams will not reflect the death of ours. For those of us who were imprinted with fear like a faint line in the center of our foreheads, learning to be afraid with our mother's milk. For by this weapon, this illusion of some safety to be found, the heavy-footed hope to silence us, for all of us, this instant and this triumph, we were never meant to survive. And when the sun rises, we are afraid it might not remain. And when the sun sets, we are afraid it might not rise in the morning. And when our stomachs are full, we are afraid of indigestion. And when our stomachs are empty, we are afraid we may never eat again. And when we are loved, we are afraid love will vanish. When we are alone, we are afraid love will never return. And when we speak, we are afraid our words will not be heard nor welcomed. But when we are silent, we are still afraid. So it is better to speak, remembering we were never meant to survive. I thank you all for being with us here. I thank you for being with Marie. There is whatever ingredients the Lord saved to mix up the specific batch that made Marie is a holy blend. We're so lucky to lift her up and so lucky to sit with her words and her mind, which imagines things not yet imagined. Toni Morrison talks a lot about, and Octavia Butler talked a lot about. You know, you can call my work magic realism if you want, but what my people had to imagine to survive is very real. And I think of that when I read Marie's work, what we have to imagine that might seem fantastical or impossible, whimsical, is in fact critical methods for tomorrow. I feel so grateful to be here, and I'm going to pass it off to whoever is next speaking. Thank you for having me.
Angel, thank you so much for reading tonight, and also for leading us in that collective breath at the beginning. I'm just in awe of you and of your brilliance. Hi, everyone. On behalf of all of us at BOM, we are grateful and honored to gather for an evening of reading, of thought, and conversation with three incredible writers and thinkers, Angel Nafis, Alexandra Kleeman, and Marie-Helene Bertino, who all share a special kind of genius that shines not only in their innovative and experimental poetry and fictions, but also in their profound emotional intelligence and generosity. Thank you to Greenlight Bookstore for partnering with us in hosting tonight's event. BOM encourages all listeners tonight to sign petitions and fund organizations and mutual aid efforts supporting the Black Lives Matter movement. And Greenlight will be posting in the chat some resources, and BOM will be amplifying those resources on our website as well. I am honored to introduce Marie tonight on the occasion of her new novel, Parakeet. Marie has an incredible short story in the summer issue of BOM called Michael in Light Colors, which is currently up on our website for everyone to read. And it's about two lovers divided by what she calls an unseen force. The characters discover this almost paranormal membrane that prevents true intimacy and connection. And Marie describes it so minimally and yet so effectively, using a blank, like a fill in the blank or a redaction. And she captures this void, this something that divides, and the crushing sadness of that between two people. And it's interesting because in a way it almost describes the opposite of the feeling of reading one of Marie's stories or being friends with her. One of her great powers as a fiction writer and as a person is her ability to invite you in, and to do so with tenderness and with mutual understanding, and just generating this effortless intimacy with her readers and with her community. Her fictions, and Parakeet is no exception, turn on a sense of kinship, of relation between people and all living beings, including magnificent birds. So without further ado, Marie is now going to read an excerpt from her new book, Parakeet, and I'll turn it over to her. Thank you so much, Marie.
Thank you so much, Chantal. Can you hear me, everyone? Can you see me? Oh, okay, great. I can't see myself. Weird. Okay. Oh, thank you. Someone said nice paintings. Okay, great. So you can see me. Good that I can't see anyone. That's perfect. Chantal, thank you so much. Those are beautiful words that I will try to deserve. Angel, I couldn't love you more for being here with me tonight. I think I speak for everyone on earth when I say we would have listened to you until tomorrow morning. It is so incredibly important to me that you are here. I launched Cat's Pajamas with Angel as well. Everyone, please go and buy and do yourselves a favor and read and cherish Angel's collection, Black Girl Mansion. We are going to be talking about her work forever. So you're getting in on the first or second level now. And what we just experienced is a rare treat. Thank you so much. And thank you, Alex, for being here with me tonight. I could not do it without you queens tonight. Thank you, everyone who is at home and joining us. I can't believe how many people are here. Wherever you are sitting, you are welcome here. Thank you so much for joining us tonight to celebrate Parakeet. I wrote Parakeet over the course of 7 years, some that aged me, some that made me young. The character of the bride in Parakeet is where I put everything I know so far about being a woman, about siblinghood, about trauma, violence, abuse, and real love. Thank you to FSG, Jenna Johnson, Lydia Zoles, Lauren Roberts, Claudia Ballard, Greenlight, and BOM, who have supported me since I was a lowercase m. And thank you to my family and friends who've always allowed for me. And in the spirit of that, I'd like to take a moment to talk about where I'm sitting tonight, to acknowledge that everyone involved in this reading, everyone you just saw on the screen, and everyone who is unseen who got those people here tonight, Jessica, Angel, Alex, Chantal, and me are living in the epicenter of a global pandemic. All of us and all of you who joined us tonight are sharing a moment of collective grief and trauma, and we are leaderless. So it is up to the individual to take up the collective mantle of mourning, like the healthcare workers who've gone to profoundly challenging lengths to keep the rest of us safe. In my personal life, from my personal life, I would like to thank Adam Brown, Yael Shinar, Natasha Peshek-DeChico, Leah Purcell, Ryan Michael, and Nicole Cavalier, all of whom are working in the front lines of COVID-19 who have themselves gotten sick. Yesterday was the first day of Pride. 20 minutes away from where I am sitting, the Stonewall riots changed the way the world saw the LGBTQ community. Those riots were in response to police brutality. They were an act of resilience and survival by the oppressed. I stand in solidarity with the tens of thousands of protesters who gather under the simple premise that Black lives matter. A writer's job is to empathize, and I teach writers how to imagine the lives of others. And for my entire life, I have been a student of empathy. George Floyd and Breonna Taylor are two of the latest victims of a deeply racist body who could not imagine them. If we cannot believe how corrupt America is right now, that is a failure of empathy, a failure of our imagination. I'd like to invite white allies to amplify Black voices, retweet Black voices, to listen, to imagine that there are spaces that do not require your opinion, personal story, to instead step aside or decline jobs so those who can actually do the work can finally advance into the executive boards, into the college faculties, into the mastheads, to hire those who will hire those who will one day replace the racism that is so bone deep, so structural, that most of us cannot see it. Transition should feel uncomfortable. Transition takes time, but we cannot wait. We are being led by empathic failures, so we cannot rely on our leaders. I listened to Mark Lamont Hill yesterday, a professor from Temple University in Philadelphia, where I grew up, and where yesterday I watched protesters be trapped and gassed. He said, in the absence of leadership, instead of engaging in empty optics, If you have a voice like I do tonight, a public-facing platform, you must use your voice to call for justice. It is not enough to call for peace without calling for justice. Justice is the precursor to peace. Let the sea of protesters bring a sea change. Thank you so much for giving me this space to speak. I'm now going to do what feels like a very strange thing and read a few minutes from Parakeet, my book about an uncanny, unwilling, injured, strange, funny, irreverent bride. What is the internet? 1 week before my wedding day, upon returning to my hotel room with a tube of barred toothpaste, I find a small bird waiting inside the area called the antechamber, and know within moments it is my grandmother. I recognize the glittering hematite eyes, the expression of cunning disapproval. The odor of a gym at close of day encircles her. What is the internet? The bird says, does not say. Her head is the color of warning, sharp curve, yield yellow. The eyes on either side of the Cro-Magnon crown are lined the way hers were, in shoddy cornflower pencil, as if to say, really look here. Her hair that had throughout her life hurled silvery messages skyward has been replaced by orderly navy stripes that emanate down her pate like ripples in silk. Under the beak, where her unpronounced chin would have been, 4 regal feathers pose, each marked by an ebony dot. She hovers inches above the sofa's back, chastened and restless by her new form. The toothpaste lands with a dull thud on the carpet. I'm silent when stunned, no getting me to talk. What is the internet? My grandmother the bird insists, speaking as if we are in the middle of a conversation, which, in a way, we are. She had called to ask this question 10 years before. At the time, I considered explaining the technological phenomenon, but she was so old. What would be the point, I reasoned, of telling her about the show priming to begin after her exit? There have been many times in my life when, encountering an opportunity to do good for reasons of shyness or shock, an unwillingness to leave a safe perch has made me balk. I told my grandmother the internet was solely for engineers and that its effect on society would be nominal. And the following day, she climbed a ladder poised against her house, meaning to hammer a warped shingle. Something like a phone call, we were never certain, summoned her. She misremembered the ladder and fell from the roof. After she was gone, every room was a nothing room. I don't regret letting others rush forward to care for strangers in need. I don't regret calling my brother a little shit on his wedding day. However, lying to my grandmother about the internet placed a painful pebble at the bottom of my stomach that would not go away. Now my second chance claws the rim of a water glass in present internet-rich day, as alive as the rest of us, trying to sip through her beak and failing. It turned out to be more influential than I led you to believe, I say. No shit, she says. Tasked with explaining it, I realize how little I know about the internet. It began as numbers on a screen. I make a blurping sound to signify dial-up and explain that it grew from a device only a few people had to Wi-Fi, which I think is in the air. I gesture to indicate exploding. Network names showcase a defining feature of the user, the Scotty worshiper, sad oboe girl. Even as a bird, my grandmother's dubiousness is unmistakable, the cocked avian focus doubting me. When she was alive, she preferred staying in her slippers all day and the term shove it up your ass to anything, maybe even to my grandfather, who over time became a scudding booted shadow in the house's secondary rooms. In the garage, winding a clock, in the spare bedroom, repairing an outlet, shove the clock, shove the outlet. If my grandmother ever regretted slicing into another's feelings like fondant, she never admitted it. Any room containing her was merry. This was a big deal for me, since most of my childhood felt panicked and serious. She'd listen and move her eyebrows in a way that corrected my perspective. With a gaze, she could lift me older. I've come a week early to this inn on the shaft of Long Island to prepare for the transition from woman to wife, to do what the groom calls decompress, because of late I've become a bit of a monster. To break apart if necessary, but to do so properly, amid slatted pool chairs and conference coffee. I'm 36, ethnically ambiguous, and hold an intense job I do not like, biographer of people with traumatic brain injury. I present their lives in court using storyboards and dioramas. Everyone is thrilled I'm getting married. No one can believe I found such a sweet man. Everyone adores the treats sold in this town that are hybrids of bagels and flatbread. Flagels. The inn is buckled to a famous lake that features prominently on the town's signage, but I prefer the ocean because it is ugly and secretive and moody and weird and ugly and can growl. Mind you, I'm awful and rarely satisfied. I'm not sure if you're aware what day you've landed on. I speak to the bird in the grated voice you employ for a guest who has arrived too early. It's Sunday. I'm getting married in 6 days. I gesture to the migration of folded cards that cover the carpet in ecru V's, anointed with all I can recall from high school calligraphy. Have you come to wish me well? I say, but knowing her, my tone contains no hope. Married! The edges of her projection spit and haul. Do you think I'm here to ask about wires in a box? She goes transparent and her skeleton shows blinding bright. Then whatever debatably divine force is conjuring her regains composure, and she is opaque again. She says, "There's something I want you to do." Thank you so much. Now I'd like to invite the absolutely resplendent, unparalleled mind of Alexandra Kleeman, to join me.
Hi, that was so beautiful. Hi.
Hello.
Hey, thank you guys so much for joining us here during a time when I know we're weighed down by a lot of different feelings, a lot of anger, a lot of sadness. I want to talk a little bit about how I met Marie and what this book means to me, but first I want to thank Greenlight Books and BOM for hosting this. I want to thank all of you for showing up. I want to thank Angel for reading and joining us all in such fiery and powerful and centering feeling, and also reminding me to breathe, because I don't think I've done that consciously all day today. So like a lot of people actually in the comments section, I met Marie, though Marie won't remember it because she wasn't there. I met Marie through Safe as Houses. I stumbled upon this book in a Brooklyn bookstore in Greenlight, actually, and I was just taken by it from the first page that I read. And one of its short stories, Sometimes You Break Their Hearts, Sometimes They Break Yours, became the story that I handed out to everybody I know. If you want to know what my heart is like, if you want to know what my loneliness is like, read this short story. Little did I know that someday, 8 years in the future, 6 years in the future, Marie would be my friend and someone who I can call to get a cup of coffee, and someone whose unique spirit nourishes me as it nourishes so many of you too. So that's a moment where I want to remind you that Greenlight is hosting this wonderful event, and there is a link where you can find Angel's book, Black Girl Mansion, Marie's newest release, and her 2 previous books. If you buy Safe as Houses, you'll probably end up being good friends with Marie, and that's a bonus. It seems to work for everyone.
That's probably true.
Yeah. So one of the things I think is so special about Marie's writing is just the unique, inviting emotionality of it. She's a person who's able to take such difficult feelings, I think, feelings of pain, trauma, of loss, of loneliness, and approach them in a way that makes them sometimes light, sometimes heavy. She holds them aloft, they transform, they metamorphose, they become something that you can experience from every different angle and every different facet. And it really has been a wonderful thing for me in this moment where I know that I and many of you feel doubly hollowed out by the lack of justice in this country and by the pandemic that we're all suffering under and suffering unequally under. I feel doubly hollow, doubly empty. And her book, Parakeet, has been a place where I can go to feel like I have space to feel the full range of feelings, space to connect with my sadness, and space to connect to this larger human thing that gives me energy to take into the world when I close the book. So for that reason, I just want to say that I think a fantastic tribute to this book would be to go after this event is over. Of course, buy Marie's book, read it, feel those good things. But also take a look at some of the links that Greenlight is posting in the margins here, and do something that can make you feel connected to the world. Help something, get out there and protest if you feel comfortable, donate, look into what sort of mutual aid organizations exist in your area, and let this book and its fantastic spirit connect you back to the people around you. So I want to get into just talking about Marie's book more directly. First of all, Marie, I'm fascinated by hearing you call yourself a surrealist writer. Surrealists were always one of my favorite people to read when I was in high school and when I was in college. And I was always a little bit sad that they were all passed away and done and historical, but I think your book really keeps that spirit alive. I want to ask, what do you think magical realism and surrealism have to nourish us in these times?
Thank you for that excellent question. Do you call yourself a surrealist, Alex? Because your work is, I would say, very surreal.
I feel like some of it is pretty surreal, but I didn't give myself license to, and I feel like I might start now.
Okay, good. Yeah, okay, that's what this moment is about, giving us all permission to call ourselves whatever we want. That's the true nature of surrealism and magic realism. And I want to say, Alex, I don't think that you got loved enough, because the reason I asked you to join me tonight is because you are the kind of person who asks questions, is curious about other people, and listens to the answers. And that shows up so clearly in your work, which also combines all of these wonderful, admirable things that are so rare and so hard to find. So when I was asked by the amazing Greenlight and Baum, who I wanted to be in conversation with, I was very much hoping you would do this with me. And since we couldn't possibly have known it would be today, on this Tuesday, after a global pandemic and then the most acute moment we've had for race that came after the global pandemic, on a Tuesday that just so happens to be the only day that publishing and art and the arts have ever decided to not post anything at all. It's almost like we are the luckiest girls on earth to have hit these odds. I mean, to just be here together is always a miracle, but here we are. And so I really can't thank you enough for that. So magic realism and surrealism. I think magic realism, like the proper classical, what I call like the ballet term, I feel like has a connotation of political unrest, normally has connotations of Latin writers, Garcia Marquez. And when I started studying it, I realized there was also a vibe of work in it, a preoccupation with occupation and work. These people had jobs. And that was always very interesting to me, since in the canon, normally we read these older white writers who never seem to have jobs and write very realistically, but never seem to be working and certainly aren't preoccupied with work. Yet in something like Kafka's Metamorphosis, he spends that entire story trying to get to work. In fact, that's the whole thing. His usefulness is determined by whether he can work. And so what my pet idea about it is that the realists never really had to imagine themselves into better circumstances. So they could write exactly they could write their lives exactly as they were because they were affluent. They didn't have to imagine that they could feed their families because they could. And having to imagine yourself out of your current circumstances can be a very powerful and creative thing. And so it just always made sense for what I was trying to do. And also, I mean, Edgar Carrot talked about just cutting out the middleman. If feeling like you're in love is akin to feeling like you could fly, why not just say she flew? And so I liked that too. I liked making the metaphorical literal. And I think there's no end to how it could help us in this moment.
I know that one thing that this novel does so powerfully for me is there in sort of the logic. Like I think a lot about how the surrealists went for irrational or like alternative logic to get away from the same like ultra rational logic that led us straight into war and death. In your book, I see a really interesting logic applied to trauma and to giving this character the space to create a structure for thinking about her own trauma. We began with her walking into her hotel room shortly before her wedding and finding her grandmother embodied as a parakeet that can talk to her and ask about the internet. But we also feel as a reader like we're being led to the moment where we hear about this really traumatic event that indirectly caused the rift between her and her brother. And I have to say, for people who haven't read the book yet, that chapter is one of the finest chapters I've ever read. It's just, I was there with you every single second, every single word. So I'm curious how you approach pairing trauma with humor and how you built a container for that moment with your writing.
Oh, Alex, you're so smart. I will try to answer that question as articulately as it was posed. So thank you for mentioning that chapter. That's the eponymous chapter. So that's the chapter called Parakeet. And that's when we hear about how the bride has been injured. And it was a very, very tricky scene to write. It is disturbing. If I ever read it out loud, I will have to warn people about it. You know, it's that kind of thing. I wrote that chapter somewhat early and felt like the sound of it I could hear very clearly. So I matched the words to the sound I was hearing that had something to do with sparseness, something having to do with describing the trauma on the body and pain as economically as possible, but also, so trauma works kind of like dream logic in that the senses kind of go to their separate corners and you can almost pick them off like separate entities. So immediately the bride's sense of hearing almost rises onto the ceiling and she's only aware of what she's hearing. And it's written about extensively, I'm sure. It's disassociation. You do what you have to do to get through the moment and get to the next moment. And, you know, I said earlier I was a student of empathy. I've also kind of been informally a student of heartache and pain, as I'm sure a lot of us have been as writers. And I was a biographer of people with traumatic brain injury for 3 years and interviewed people who had been through severe, severe injury, recovery, PTSD. And speaking to them over and over again reinforced what I had already been thinking about, where your brain, the tricks that your brain plays when you're in a crisis moment. And so that chapter is a reflection of that, of how the senses, some senses leave you completely and come back, what time does, that it slows down to a stop, that it rewinds, that it gulps, that it, there are parenthetical expressions inside of moments of pain, what you find yourself saying things you never would, just to get through. It's amazing, our surviving sense. And so that paragraph, that chapter is very much the literal representation of everything I was thinking about dream logic and trauma and memory.
Mhm. I just want to note that I took time gulps and I wrote this down and underlined it 3 times. I will have to think about this and use it somehow in my own life. It's so great. Uh, but I mean, some of the different examples that you gave of how trauma comes up and is featured in this book, it reminds me that this book approaches trauma from so many different angles and in a way that anybody, I think, can find their way into it. It has multiple paths and makes you feel held and guided as you come closer and closer to this really powerful moment. So I'm just amazed at how you built a book that can hold our feelings as readers in just this really precise and lovely way.
I'm excited to hear that, because you've done it twice. Intimations, oh my God, you've done it probably 3 or 4 times so far, written a book length thing. And that chapter was my lodestar. I said when I would have trouble writing, I would say, just make everything rise up to the level of the chapter of Parakeet. And I don't know that I did it, but that was the goal. So sometimes you can do that. You can trick yourself into being a better writer.
I mean, it also sounds like a version of what I sometimes tell students, like you need a map to write your book. It can look like anything. It could be a chapter, it could be an outline, it could be just one perfect sentence that feels like it's the voice of the book, but something to guide you. And yeah, it really feels like that chapter is at the heart of the book.
Cool.
From my sort of biased perspective, I teach with you at the New School, and I know that we have a lot of enthusiastic fans of Marie-Helene Bertino in the chat who are also your students. So I wanted to ask one question tailored to sort of you as a teacher, since so many people here know you that way. I wonder how teaching influenced the writing of this book, because it was written over 7 years and you've been teaching many of those years. What did you learn while writing it also?
I'm going to ask you to answer the same question. I want to know, because I get this question, I'm not quite sure how my teaching influences my writing necessarily. I do know how it influences my life, The students are so fearless. Hello, New School. Hi. I think IAIA might be in the house too, and NYU. New School, activate. I think that they are so fearless and so challenging to me. They don't let me go on anything, which is one of my favorite qualities in a human. They don't let me slide. I had a conversation last year with the New School students about Virginia Woolf that I'll be thinking about forever, where they basically just challenged her place on the syllabus. After we spent 3 days discussing Mrs. Dalloway and dissecting, they were very polite. They waited to the end. And then they say, why do we study this affluent, sexist, kind of racist, xenophobic woman? Why is she taking the place of someone else? And we had that conversation just marked me in my pedagogical depths. And I'm still thinking about it. And I asked them to still think about it, and we still talk about it, because, I do think that people still think that a white woman on the syllabus can do the work of diversity. And some people still think that a white woman or a white person can decolonize a space. And I don't like using that word, but it's important to say what it is, to have these difficult conversations and to have the whole conversation. Why are we teaching what we are teaching? Literature plumbs the depths of our most unspoken desires. A place on the syllabus, giving someone a point of view on a page is a privileged space, is a privileged role. So why aren't we more careful with who we give these spaces to, I don't know. How do you feel teaching influences your writing, Alex? Does it?
Well, I think it has to. I think I spend more time talking to my students than about anybody else except the person I live with or my dog. I talk to my dog too. But maybe the big thing for me is feeling like I'm always telling my students to be kind to themselves in their head, you know, and I think that telling them that and remembering that this really is the more productive way into the really long-term marathon-like task of writing as a career it is a good reminder to myself that I need to be kind to myself within my own head too, and not shout at myself when I think I'm doing things wrong. Treating yourself with empathy, reminding others to treat themselves with empathy, and reminding them that, you know, whether a book takes 2 years or 10 years, you'll get there in the end and you'll come out in one piece if you're kind to yourself.
True. It's very true.
Marie, I wanted to make sure that we get to some of those questions in the Q&A. For everyone else who's watching at home, I know that there's chat going, but there's also a little tab down there with 2 conversation balloons that says Q&A, and you can post questions there that will come to me and I'll get to ask them directly to Marie. So please post and pose all of your questions down there. I have one from Joseph. It's a question for Marie. If you could travel back to your just starting to write Parakeet self and provide that self with advice about writing, about being a writer, about being a person, anything, what would you say? And what would you say that that self would hear? That adds an extra layer of complexity. That is a very nourishing question.
I there's no telling what she would actually hear. Even I wouldn't have the, oh my gosh, wouldn't dare even guess what she would hear. She hears what she wants to hear. What would I tell her? I think I would tell her that it is what you think it is. That it is something. I feel like when we begin projects so often, we're like, is this wingdings? Is this just pages of wingdings? Is this even in my language? Like, what is this? And that's why it's so amazing to have fresh eyes that you can hold your work up to and say, is this anything? You know, those trusted, dear souls. I'm lucky to have a few in my life that I would show to and say, is this wingdings? And I think I would be that trusted soul for her, just to, because so often all we need is permission. You know, I give you permission to call yourself a surrealist writer, Alex. Not that you need my permission, but if you asked for it, I would certainly give it to you. And I give everyone here permission to work on their novels or not during the pandemic, to not be trapped by the idea of productivity. I think that's what I would also say to her too. You have permission to write whatever you want to write. I wrote Parakeet after asking myself, what is the most honest thing you could write right now? How would you say it? This is something I do tell my students. Just say the thing. Say it. Say the thing. Because at least if you revise it later, at least it will have begun by you just saying it plain. Talk prose. Say it plain. Do whatever you want after that, but just say it. Wow, I guess I would tell her an awful lot. I'm mostly chatting with myself. She would probably say, oh my God, okay, shut up.
I think that that's amazing advice. So if you can't time travel back and give yourself the information that, yes, this book is something, it is what you think it is, give yourself permission in the moment to write what you think is important. Yeah. But if you can time travel, yeah, that's cool.
Absolutely.
Okay, I have a question here from Kate. When you're being edited, when do you fight for something in terms of technique or story versus taking editorial advice? When do you fight to keep something you decided on, or when do you take the editorial advice?
Hopefully you don't have to fight too often. Normally I work with editors who get what I'm doing. I've been so lucky with editors. My editor on Parakeet, Jenna Johnson, is so wise. She's like this beautiful, wise owl. And I am, so that's number one. Surround yourself with people who understand you, if at all possible. Claudia Ballard, my agent, our agent, I was just talking to her earlier, and I thanked her for never being scared of my work, because I don't even understand. I'm scared of my work. And she's like, oh yeah, no problem. No worries. But anyway, oh my God, what was the question? Kate, what was your question? Alex?
When do you take editorial advice, and when do you stick to plans?
So part of what you're cultivating when you're cultivating yourself as a writer is cultivating this very hard to articulate sense of knowing when you're done, knowing when you have to go harder on yourself, knowing when you have to go easier on yourself, and knowing when something is a deal breaker on the line. And so how do you know when to fight? Because that built-in shock-proof shit detector that Hemingway talks about starts to wiggle, starts to show a reading. And that's when you hopefully not fight, but have a really smart conversation with whoever you're working with. But ideally that doesn't happen as often as it happens in the movies.
I have a pair of interrelated questions. The first is, would you speak a little bit about the role of animals in your work?
Yay! There are so many of them, and there will just only be more in the future. I just grew up loving animals. They're my favorite things in the world. And Parakeet came from, I did have a little parakeet growing up, and I just love birds. My grandmother and now my mother live in a bird sanctuary down in South Jersey. I grew up just being really in tune with them. I'm a tiny thing, so I've often been compared to birds. So I get a lot that I'm like an owl because I have giant eyes and I'm tiny, or hummingbird, butterfly. I don't know if you've gotten this too in your life, Alex, but it's like you're tiny and you flit around and you're kind of like somewhat ethereal. Which means you're daffy and flaky. You're like a butterfly or a dragonfly or a hummingbird or an owl. So I've always had a kinship to small creatures like birds and foxes and dogs, as I know you do too. So yeah, lots of animals. I'm like the anti-Wes Anderson. I just love it so much.
Well, my follow-up, which comes from Mallory Soto, is, if you had to write about or from the perspective of any kind of animal or mythical creature for 6 months, what would it be?
Mallory. Do you have an answer to that, Alex? Let me think.
From the perspective, I don't know. I don't think I'm. I think I wouldn't know how to do this yet, but I'm fascinated by snakes. So the opportunity to research snakes until I could, write a book from the perspective of a snake, that would be a plus for me. I would do that. In fact, I'll do that tomorrow.
That's your writing prompt for tomorrow. And you would be so good at that. You would upend the expectation of a snake. Because we would all think we would know what that would be like. And then you would be like, no, it is totally different. That is snake. That's a good one. I don't know why, but my first thought was dolphin. I feel like, or maybe that's too on the nose. I'd have to upend that expectation too. Because you would imagine he'd be very wise. They would be very wise. I don't know. I'll have to
very playful. Like, where's the crotchety dolphin novel of my dreams,
That we all have been waiting for. Right.
All of our dreams.
Maybe someone's working on it during this very pandemic.
We have time for a couple more. If you have a question, put it into Q&A and we're going to try to get to it. I have one. It's a two-parter, but I'll start with the first part. This is from Libby Flores. What was the most challenging part of writing this book?
It does deal with a lot of trauma, and so revisiting it could sometimes was just a little bit hard to be navigating and constantly needing those topics. And so I very much tried to juxtapose it, as I do a lot in my work, I would say, with joy. And so there are moments of beauty that spark here and there to kind of counterbalance that. And that made it easier to write here and there. There's a moment at the end of the chapter called The Ship. So Parakeet is episodic as well. It's like episode after episode after episode, kind of. And The Ship is a chapter that has a very surprising end to it. She moves through something in the street, something very unexpected. And that to me was the balance, that beautiful, joyful, ebullient, buoyant, completely impossible moment that she experiences was also part of being someone who's been injured, who has been hurt in the way, physically hurt in the way that she has. It acts as a portal to new understanding. And so I'm not someone who talks a lot about or believes very much in everything happens for a reason and just like meditate on it and, you know, everything. I tend to be a tiny bit more critical than that. I will say though that I do think having gone through things like she has gone through in the novel does allow you to do things like hear music a little more, be there for people a little more if you choose to go the empathic way. I do think it seals other people off, and they have this trauma and they're sealed off and they're terrible to other people. They're false, or they lie, or they hide in some way. But I prefer to write about the people who are still struggling to be good people, even after terrible things happen. And so the trauma was balanced with the joy, which helped. Sorry, Libby, you didn't ask that, but I just decided to follow the parade of thought.
I'm going to ask you two more questions.
All right.
And then we'll wrap up. One is a Frankenstein question, because it combines a question from Rebecca and a question from Tim, because I think they're related. Do you remember what it was like to be a debut writer? And how was writing this book different from writing your debut?
Oh, for sure I remember. I feel like I still am a debut writer. How was it different? Thankfully, I knew more people this time around. Safest Houses, we had to beg people to blurb that book. Beg. And so I will forever do the laundry of Jim Shepard, Deb Owen Unferth, and Brett Anthony Johnston, who by the grace of their hearts blurbed that book. Because I knew people, but I was an unknown, and it just seemed like I didn't have much luck with that stuff. I'm so grateful that on my third book, I'm able to call someone like Alexandra Kleeman and Angel, and to have a relationship with Bomb Magazine, to have a relationship with Greenlight Books. You know, I enjoy being in community with writers. It's something that I didn't even know to hope for or dream about when I was a little girl of 4 writing my first book about bunnies I found on the lawn. Bunnies! I would like to write about the point of view of a bunny. A mean bunny.
We'll have a separate talk that's just about animals
Okay,
in Marie's work.
But yes,
Zoom up those after.
the most amazing part about having it be the third book is the people, the colleagues I get to talk shop with. Writers are the best people to talk to, and I'm blessed.
Thank you so much for that answer, Marie. I think I'm having trouble with my internet, so apologies if my sound cuts out. I'm going to ask my one final question, which comes from Maria. And this is a question for Marie, but if you have an answer there in the audience, please type it into the chat, because we need as many answers as possible. The question is, how do you keep writing, especially when the walls seem like they're closing in? Self-doubt, life, and I'll add international pandemic and crises of justice to that list. How do you keep writing when the walls are closing in?
I don't know. I am not writing right now. And I'm not going to ask you if you're writing, Alex, though I want to. But I think it's also okay to not write and to let yourself off the hook a little bit, as far as this moment goes. How do I write when the walls are closing in during non-pandemic times? You know, sometimes I'll say, just write it. You can hate it later. You can delete it later. Just write it now. Show up for it. Show up to the practice. Show up for it, even if it's terrible. Read a book, that's also writing. Walking around, talking to people you respect. That to me, walking around and noticing what you're noticing, jotting down notes. I feel like being a writer is a way of looking at the world and a way of noticing. And that counts. As far as I'm concerned, that counts as writing. When the walls are closing in, flipping up the practice helps. Writing in bed, writing in a different place than you normally do. Maybe you always write in bed, then you write at your desk, write in a coffee shop. I remember Hannah Tinty from One Story, when I worked at One Story, she would black out her screen. She would turn the brightness down on her screen completely and just type into the dark screen for 10 minutes so she couldn't see what she was typing. I mean, you want to talk literally writing toward the unknown. That, I always loved that idea. And please, everyone, share in the comments. There's no end to the ideas you can use, and they're like little tools in your tool belt. Because the thing is, too, that it could work 5 times in a row to write in bed, for example, and it won't work the 6th time. So I think part of the whole gig is learning as much as you can and being a student of how this works for you, and having enough options to recalibrate when you need to, because you will always have to recalibrate.
That's so correct. We always have to recalibrate, but hopefully, you know, for me, I know that when I get stuck now and when I'm troubled by the world, I have Parakeet to turn to and open up and read a little part from. They'll help me feel grounded and emotional, and like I have a friend there in that book. So thank you so much for this beautiful book, Marie. Angel, thank you for your beautiful reading. Thank you to BOM and to Greenlight for hosting this. And remember, there's a great buy link, coupon link going through the chat, as well as a lot of links that you can click on to do some good after this.
We're sending everyone a lot of love from New York City tonight. Thank you for sitting with us. Thank you for holding this space with us. We love you, and we are here for you. And I love you guys. Thank you so much for being here with me.
I love you, Marie. Happy Parakeet Day.
Thank you, everybody.
Have a good night.